In the second set of videos for week 3 tutorials, we're going to be learning about recording macros and editing the VBA code, Visual Basic for Applications code that gets generated when you record a macro. So I assume you've downloaded the folder, the file to accompany these 3 videos. Um, and then the instructions after you enable um, have 3 parts to it, and they have quite a few steps. Um, so what are macros? Macros are a feature where you can do a recording, not unlike a video recording, but this is a recording that records all of your entries that you make in Excel. So it could be data entry, it could be entering of formulas, functions, advanced features, formatting. Whatever you do in Excel can be recorded and then executed again. So it's useful if people have repetitive tasks or if they have advanced tasks that you want them to be able to click on and automatically execute. They can also be tricky and a little bit dangerous. Could lead to viruses and whatnot if done in a malicious way. So before you create a macro, it's important to understand that it records everything you do step by step. So you want to be prepared and be ready before you begin recording. So I always do a rehearsal or a practice before I begin recording a macro. Um, so we have this worksheet called inventory, and we've already done this. So back in week 1, we learned how to do a price plus tax with an absolute reference and another formula, and we did a conditional format. So let's practice doing these 4 different tasks in Excel. So I'm going to go quickly since we've already done this, and the point of this is not to learn how to do an absolute reference, but how to do a macro. So in order to compute the price plus tax column, I'm going to take the price and I'm going to multiply it by 1 plus the tax rate, and I'm going to hit the F4 button to absolute reference the tax rate. I'm going to double click to autocomplete. To compute the value of inventory with tax, I'm going to multiply the price with tax times the number in stock, and I'm going to double click to autocomplete. And then to apply the conditional format, I'm going to select the data in column E. Looks like we have some sort of garbage in column 71. So I'm going to delete that column. When you do an autocomplete with the double click, it goes down to the last row where it finds data, and since it went an extra row, there must have been something, spaces or something in one of those cells. So anyway, I'm going to select the data in column E, and I'm going to go to conditional formatting. And I'm going to highlight cells that are equal to 0 in red. So that's what I want the recording to do. As it says in the instructions, I'm going to do those 3 tasks. I don't think we really need to do any formatting. So now I'm going to undo everything that I did. So we're back to our original spreadsheet here, I am going to go in and delete column 71, row 71, so that I hope my autocomplete will only go down to 70. Okay, so now I'm ready to do the recording. And in order to record a macro, you need a menu option called Developer, that when you install Excel, it does not come with Developer automatically. So you need to add it. And you add the Developer menu option by clicking File, Options. This main menu in your any of your Office programs is called the ribbon. So I'm going to click on Customize Ribbon, and then over here to the far right, we want to check the button for Developer. By default, it's unchecked. And then when I click OK, the Developer option will be out there. So your computer, if you're working at home, you only need to do that once. And even with new files, your developer menu option will always be out there. However, if you're on campus and you're using a campus computer, because they refresh every time, even if you go back to the same computer, you have to add the developer each time you need it. I'm not sure if you'll need to do this or not, but in the developer menu, there's a macro security. Some people have their settings to disable macros, and we want to enable them. So you might want to check this button. If you have disable macros without notification, I think that's the default. I think you can enable them if you're downloading a new one. So anyway, now we're ready to get started. But before we start recording, I want to point out a very important thing. When you have a macro, you have a different file type. So when you save a file, instead of saving as an Excel workbook, you need to save your file with the second option, Excel Macro Enabled Workbook. If you don't do that, you'll lose all of the VBA or macro that you record. So whenever we do anything involving VBA or macros, which will be for the next week, we always have to save our file as a file type with Macro Enabled Workbook. And that'll have a, for those of you who are familiar with the extension, XLXS, it will be XLXM for an M at the end of the file type. Nowadays, you don't really see the extension anymore, but just know that it's going to be a macro-enabled workbook instead of an Excel workbook. So I've resaved the file as macro-enabled workbook. Now we're on step 9, and we're ready to get started for real. So I'm going to go to Developer, and there's an option here called Record Macro. Let me go over to Inventory first. And remember again what we're doing. We're going to apply a formula to multiply this number by 1 plus this number with an absolute reference, and then we're going to autocomplete. And then for the value of inventory, we're going to multiply this number times this number. And lastly, we're going to select the data in column E and apply a conditional format for the values equal to 0. So let's go ahead and record those. So I'm going to click on Record Macro. And one thing that's very important, after you begin a recording, you want to move your mouse to the cell where you want the first formula or function to be entered. You don't want your active cell to already be there, because then the recording won't know that it has to move there, if that makes sense. So I'm going to click on Record Macro, and I'm going to get a pop-up window that asks, what do I want the name of the macro to be? So I'm going to name this Compute Inventory with no spaces. Compute is a keyword. You can usually we're going to use buttons, but you can have a shortcut key. I'm going to put I out there as the shortcut key. And then when I click OK, at that point it's going to begin recording. So I click OK, and notice that the Record Macro button has changed to stop recording. So everything I do from this point forward is being recorded, and not the audio, not literally being recorded like a video or audio recording, but every single step or function or format, any entry that I make in the spreadsheet is going to be recorded. So the first thing I'm going to do as part of the recording is move the cell D4. And then I'm going to enter my formula equals C4 times 1 plus C1, and I'm going to hit the F4 button to absolute reference, and I'm going to enter, go back to D4 and autofill. Then I'm going to go over to F4, and I'm going to multiply E4 times D4, hit enter, autofill. Then I'm going to go to E4 and select down to the bottom of the spreadsheet. You can see I fixed that problem with the extra row. Then I'm going to go to Home and apply a conditional format, highlighting cells equal to 0 in red. And if I scroll up, I can see that it's working. So now that I'm done, I'm going to go back to Developer and stop the recording. Okay, so now I want to test my recording. So I'm going to undo all the things that I just did yet once again. So now that I've undid those, I can apply the Control I button. So I hold down my Control button and select I, and hopefully everything is going to compute automatically. So magically I hit Control I, and it executed all in one step. Notice that you cannot undo the running of a macro, which is quite dangerous actually. But if we wanted to test it again, I could go into kind of manually delete the different entries, and I can go into column E, select it, and go into my conditional formatting and clear the rules. So I'm kind of back to where I was. And another way to run a macro is to click on macros and select run, and I get my results and everything looks fine, so I'm happy with it. So I'm going to save my work and end this video.